Modern command does not fail because it chooses poorly. It fails because it is bounded by time it no longer controls. When permission consumes the window it governs, authority becomes a constraint, not a safeguard. For most of modern military history, authority sat comfortably ahead of action. Decisions were made first. Orders followed. Weapons moved only after permission had been granted. That sequence shaped everything. Command structures, reporting chains, engagement rules, and escalation controls were all built on the same assumption. There would be time between awareness and action. Time to verify, time to confer, time to decide. Engagement windows were wide enough to tolerate hesitation. Waiting was not dangerous. Delay was a form of control. That assumption no longer holds. The problem is not that weapons have become faster. Speed alone is manageable. What has collapsed is the margin that once separated decision from consequence. Timelines have compressed to the point where authorization itself consumes the window it was meant to govern. By the time permission is granted, the moment that permission applied to has already passed. Waiting no longer preserves control. Waiting forfeits relevance. In this environment, command authority does not fail dramatically. It simply arrives too late. The structure still exists. The processes still run. The approvals still move forward. They just no longer arrive in time to matter. The sequence has inverted. Engagement conditions now mature faster than human command cycles can acknowledge them. Opportunities do not wait to be recognized. They expire. This creates a pressure that cannot be resolved by better communication or clearer intent. The issue is not misunderstanding. It is ordering. When the timeline of action becomes shorter than the timeline of permission, authority is no longer a gate. It becomes a bottleneck. And bottlenecks are not neutral. They decide outcomes by omission. In this environment, the central tension is no longer about choosing correctly. It is about choosing early enough to count. Because when decisions must occur before permission can be granted, the question is no longer who decides. It is when authority must already have been spent. Human authorization operates on sequence. Information is gathered, it is assessed, it is routed upward, it is weighed, confirmed, and approved. Each step assumes slack in the timeline. Slack to absorb uncertainty. Slack to allow reconsideration. Slack to preserve the option of waiting. That slack has disappeared. Weapon timelines no longer expand to meet command cycles. They collapse past them. Time to impact has shortened to the point where deliberation is no longer a buffer. It is a delay that consumes the engagement window itself. Authorization does not lag because people are slow. It lags because it is procedural. Because it is layered. Because it is designed to be cautious rather than immediate. Compression exposes this mismatch. As timelines tighten, each additional handoff carries disproportionate cost. Every verification step eats into the same shrinking margin. Every request for confirmation subtracts from the remaining window. What once felt like prudence now functions as erosion. The system continues to behave as if time were elastic, even as the environment proves it is rigid. Authorization chains still complete. Reports still arrive. Approvals are still granted. They simply conclude after relevance has expired. Processes finish successfully, but too late to shape outcomes. The machinery of command remains intact, yet increasingly disconnected from the moment it was designed to govern. Eventually, the window closes while the process is still running. At that point, escalation is no longer optional. The system cannot slow the environment to match its pace. It must either act earlier or not act at all. This is not a choice between aggression and restraint. It is a mechanical outcome of timing asymmetry. When action thresholds are reached before authority can arrive, escalation becomes structural. Not because someone decides to escalate, but because the system no longer has time to wait. The pressure intensifies as compression continues. What was once a decision point becomes a missed opportunity. What was once caution becomes irrelevance. What was once control becomes delay. As margins collapse, the system is forced toward a conclusion it did not explicitly choose. Either authority moves earlier in time, or engagement windows vanish unused. When waiting becomes equivalent to inaction, systems adapt by moving authority forward, not by accelerating humans, but by relocating decision points in time. Engagement no longer begins at authorization. Authorization must already exist before engagement conditions fully form. This requires a shift away from case-by-case approval toward pre-committed action space. Permission is no longer granted in response to a situation. It is embedded in advance, bounded by constraints rather than confirmation. Decision logic is delegated downward, not as discretion, but as enclosure. Rules are defined ahead of contact. Thresholds are set before conditions materialize. Acceptable responses are specified without knowing which one will be triggered. The system does not ask what it should do in the moment. It verifies whether the moment falls inside an already approved boundary. Within those envelopes, action proceeds automatically. Not because the system is aggressive, but because there is no longer time to ask. This does not expand freedom of action. It removes the option to veto. Once the envelope is defined, outcomes inside it are no longer revisited. There is no pause to reconsider, no moment to reauthorize, no opportunity to intervene once timelines are in motion. Control shifts from deciding what to do to deciding what is allowed to happen. The action itself is no longer the moment of choice. The choice has already been spent upstream, earlier in time, under incomplete information. What executes in the moment is not judgment. It is compliance with preset constraints. In this structure, action feels instantaneous, not because it is fast, but because decision has already been displaced. By the time engagement conditions are recognized, the system is no longer asking for permission. It is carrying out what was already permitted. Once authority is committed in advance, it cannot be reclaimed at the moment of contact. The decision has already been made, not in response to what is seen, but in anticipation of what might appear. This removes reversibility. There is no longer a point where action can be paused for review. No interval where new information can halt execution. No opportunity to reassert human veto once timelines begin to run. When engagement unfolds, it does so inside boundaries that were fixed earlier. Outcomes are not evaluated in the moment. They are accepted as the cost of acting within compressed time. Commitment replaces confirmation. This is not a failure of oversight. It is the consequence of inversion. Once authority is pre-spent, it is fully consumed. Nothing remains to be applied at the moment of contact. Post-action review may still occur, but it no longer exerts control. Analysis arrives after execution. Assessment follows consequence. Correction, when possible, applies only to future constraints, not current outcomes. The system can learn, but it cannot intervene. When timelines mature faster than authority can arrive, control must be exercised before relevance, or not at all. Mistakes, when they occur, are not corrected. They are endured. There is no mechanism to stop and reassess once the sequence has begun. The system is no longer waiting for certainty. It is operating on commitment. Responsibility does not disappear, but it shifts out of the moment of action. Accountability exists upstream, where constraints were set and authority was pre-spent. At the point of contact, nothing is being decided. Everything that matters has already been locked in. In this environment, consequence is not a result. It is a condition. Once the window closes, the system lives with whatever its earlier authority allowed to happen. Doctrine does not prevent the inversion. It forms after the break, in response to it. Once authority can no longer arrive at the moment of action, militaries adapt by relocating control earlier in the chain. Not to regain precision, but to manage inevitability. human involvement shifts upstream, from approving engagements to defining boundaries, from reacting to situations to constraining outcomes. Doctrine becomes a framework for pre-commitment. Instead of deciding when to act, it specifies under what conditions action is permitted. Instead of controlling execution, it governs setup. Authority is exercised in advance through rules, envelopes, and exclusions. Humans are no longer positioned as real-time deciders. They become architects of constraint. Doctrine increasingly formalizes this role shift. It codifies how much authority must be spent early, where discretion is removed, and which outcomes are considered acceptable before contact occurs. Rather than seeking perfect decisions, doctrine seeks bounded ones. It defines loss tolerance in advance, recognizing that some outcomes will occur without review or intervention. Control is reframed as containment. Procedures are written to limit exposure. Thresholds are designed to cap consequence. Escalation boundaries are specified before relevance collapses. Oversight concentrates where time still exists, not where outcomes unfold. This does not restore control in the traditional sense. It acknowledges its loss and attempts to make that loss survivable. Doctrine emerges not as optimization, but as damage management. It is an attempt to make pre-spent authority legible, auditable, and governable under compression. The system accepts that it cannot wait. So it teaches itself how to commit earlier, with fewer degrees of freedom and no expectation of reversal. When weapon reach outpaces command authority, control does not disappear. It is simply spent before anyone can ask for it.